Feds were actually giving the victim the money to give to him.
Oh, so it was a setup.
I mean,
in a way,
call it what you want. So
disheartened by the fact that they trying to say that I stole something from developing option, or I used developing option as a front.
It's the kind of story that sounds like a script for a Hollywood crime thriller. But this is real life, and the stakes are higher than any movie could ever portray. Eugene Big U Henley Jr., a name that once struck fear and commanded respect in equal measure across Los Angeles, is now at the center of one of the most explosive legal battles the city has ever seen. But this isn't just about indictments and courtroom proceedings. No, this is a tangled web of betrayal, power struggles, and secrets that have been simmering for years, threatening to boil over into complete chaos. And right in the middle of this storm, the equally controversial Wack 100, whose role in this saga has left everyone guessing whether he's the whistleblower, the provocateur, or just another player in a dangerous game that no one can seem to win.
Good evening. We've been following this story throughout the day. Federal officers arrested more than a dozen members tied to the gang known as the Rollin' 60s Neighborhood Crips, though its leader was on the run. Well, within the last 20 minutes, the FBI announcing that man, Eugene Henley Jr., a.k.a. Big U, is now in custody.
Let's rewind a bit, though, because to understand how we got here, you have to peel back the layers of deceit and ambition that have defined the decades-long careers of these two men. On the surface, Big U and Wack 100 appear to be cut from a similar cloth. Both are music industry insiders who've navigated their way through a world where deals are made in dimly lit rooms and reputations are enforced by street politics. But beneath that thin veneer of professional respect lies a festering rivalry that has exploded into a public feud so bitter, it's hard to tell where the personal ends and the criminal begins.
Oh, so that's not part of the Fed case? Oh.
So that's 43 counts that's excluding the homicide. Nevada's going to charge that independently as a state case.
For Big U, the trouble started long before the feds came knocking. His image as a community activist, a man supposedly working to uplift Los Angeles' most vulnerable neighborhoods, was always undercut by whispers that he never truly left the streets behind. Sure, he was hosting youth programs and rubbing elbows with celebrities, but behind closed doors, people were saying he still had his hands in everything, from shady business dealings to strong-arm tactics that made even his allies nervous. And then there's Wack 100, who some would describe as a master manipulator, a man who knows exactly when to stir the pot and how to position himself as both the hero and the villain, depending on the narrative that suits him best. To say these two have history would be an understatement, but it wasn't until recently that their animosity reached the point of no return.
Music executive and alleged LA gang leader Eugene Henley Jr. is heading to trial. Last month, he was named in a 43-county federal indictment, and this afternoon, he pleaded not guilty during his arraignment. Prosecutors accuse Henley of running a criminal enterprise involving human trafficking, robbery, and extortion. They also say Henley, known as Big U, has ties to the notorious Rollin' 60s Neighborhood Crips street gang.
It all began to unravel when Wack 100 started dropping bombshells on every platform he could find. Whether it was late-night clubhouse rants or high-profile podcast appearances, Wack seemed determined to paint Big U as something far worse than just another hustler trying to make it big. He wasn't just throwing shade, he was lighting up the entire block with accusations that Big U was deeply involved in criminal enterprises stretching from extortion to, you guessed it, using his so-called community work as a front for something much darker. And while Wack's habit of talking first and thinking later has earned him plenty of critics, this time, people were listening. Because here's the thing, Wack wasn't just throwing out vague claims, he was connecting dots in a way that made it impossible to ignore. And that, my friends, is where the real trouble began. On one podcast, Wack casually mentioned details about an ongoing investigation involving Big U that hadn't even been made public yet. Think about that for a moment. This wasn't just gossip, this was insider knowledge, the kind of information that raises more questions than it answers. How did Wack know what the FBI and local authorities were planning before anyone else? Was he plugged into sources that most people couldn't dream of accessing? Or was he, as some have suggested, playing both sides of the fence, feeding information to law enforcement while using his platform to stir up chaos? Whatever the case, the fallout was immediate. Within weeks of Wack's revelations, federal agents launched a sweeping crackdown that targeted not just Big U, but an entire network of alleged criminal associates tied to the infamous Rollin' 60s.
Well, this Big U 43-count indictment is insane.
Yeah, but you know what's dangerous about that?
Yeah.
It's still a count not there.
What's the count?
The
And that's when things got even messier. Because while Big U has always been a polarizing figure, the idea that he could be taken down by someone like Wack, a man whose own reputation is far from squeaky clean, was almost too much for some to believe. Yet the evidence kept piling up, from allegations of financial impropriety involving Big U's nonprofit organization to claims that he was behind closed-door deals designed to intimidate and control. The narrative being spun by investigators sounded like the plot of a crime novel. But for Wacky 100, this wasn't just about exposing Big U's alleged misdeeds. No, this was pointing fingers. He wasn't just pointing fingers, he was making it clear that he wanted to see Big U fall and fall hard. Of course, Big U wasn't about to take this lying down. In a series of cryptic social media posts and interviews, he fired back, accusing Wack of being the real puppet master, someone who is using his connections and media clout to manipulate the narrative and protect his own interests. And while it's easy to dismiss this as just another chapter in the never-ending saga of industry beefs, the stakes here are much higher than hurt feelings or bruised egos. Because if even half of what Wack has been saying is true, it means that Big U's empire wasn't built on community goodwill, but on a foundation of fear, manipulation, and ruthless ambition.
Your story in here starts with how you got involved in the Rolling 60s set, correct?
Yeah, well, pretty much we tried to tell everybody's backstory on how the question is hip hop and how did hip hop start, and that's 1979, and it was 1979 for LA was such a tumultuous year, meaning that with the Crips, that's when Raymond Washington, who created the Crips, 1979.
What makes this feud so fascinating and so dangerous is that both men seem to be playing a game where the rules don't apply. Wack 100 has positioned himself as a truth teller, someone who isn't afraid to shine a light on the darkest corners of the industry. But let's not forget, this is the same man who has been accused of stirring the pot for his own gain, of using controversy as currency in a world where clout often matters more than credibility. And then there's Big U, whose silence on certain key allegations has only fueled speculation that there's more to the story than he's letting on. Is he the victim of a smear campaign orchestrated by a rival with an axe to grind? Or is he the mastermind behind a criminal enterprise so sprawling that even the FBI struggles to keep up? One thing's for sure, this isn't a simple case of he said, he said. The feud between Big U and Wack 100 has pulled back the curtain on a world most people only glimpse in headlines or through the glossy lens of hip-hop documentaries. It's a world where loyalty is conditional, alliances are fleeting, and the line between business and betrayal is razor thin. And while the legal proceedings against Big U will undoubtedly reveal more in the coming months, the real story here might not be about what's happening in the courtroom. No, the real drama is unfolding behind the scenes, in the whispered conversations and backdoor deals that will shape the future of everyone involved.
If you go look at it, all the charges to the right over there, you don't see the
Well, okay, no, because when you go to justice.gov, right, which is titled, it's a press release, longtime Rolling 60s neighborhood Crips leader charged in 43-count indictment alleging murder, extortion, fraud, and tax crimes.
Go look at the 70-page. You have it? The
Well, I mean,
70-page indictment?
and it says, I mean, in the press release, it says, for example,
as the tension between these two larger-than-life figures continues to escalate, one can't help but wonder how far they're willing to go and how much they're willing to risk to come out on top. Because in a game like this, the stakes aren't just reputations or bank accounts, it's about survival. And when survival is on the line, there are no rules, no limits, and no turning back. And just when you thought the chaos couldn't spiral any further, the allegations against Big U started to take on a life of their own, like an avalanche tearing through everything in its path. The whispers became roars, and the accusations leveled at him weren't just about financial scams or petty intimidation anymore. What started as a story about shady dealings and a toxic feud had now turned into a full-blown saga involving some of the most shocking and sinister claims. Big U's name wasn't just circulating in the streets and in the studios, it was being dragged into the darkest corners of the music industry, into the very heart of the controversies that people only dare to speak about in hushed tones.
And in LA, hip-hop hit at the same time. The violence in LA hit with Crippin'. And so, yeah, it was almost like if you was going to Horseman, it was no way you was not going to be involved in gangs.
And so at that time, you was just coming up. You was young. How old were you?
Shit, 12?
12.
I think you're about 12.
Let's start with the case of Rayshawn Williams, a promising young artist who had everything going for him, until he didn't. The story of his last days reads like a sinister puzzle, with pieces missing and others deliberately obscured. but the picture that emerges is nothing short of chilling. Rayshawn was supposed to be Big U's golden ticket, a rising star signed to Big U's unique music label. The relationship between the artist and executive deteriorated quickly, and those close to the situation suggest it wasn't solely about artistic conflicts or overlooked timelines. There had been tension for weeks, fueled by rumors of disrespect, financial disagreements, and a track that, according to those close to the situation, crossed a line Rayshawn should have known better than to cross. Now, here's where things get murky. Rayshawn was last seen alive in Las Vegas, reportedly after a heated confrontation with Big U himself. The details are sketchy, like a story told through a cracked lens, but the timeline investigators have pieced together is damning. Surveillance footage, phone records, even snippets of witness testimony. It all paints a portrait of a man who may have been lured into a situation he couldn't escape. The most haunting part? The eerie silence that followed. Friends, family, collaborators, they all say the same thing. After Rayshawn vanished, Big U went radio silent. No calls, no texts, no outreach to the family, just a wall of indifference that felt, to those grieving, like a tacit admission of guilt.
After that is, in 79, after that, 12, 13, you're going to have a gun, or you're going to get one. You start carrying a gun to school, putting it in their locker, they start raiding the lockers, and you're trying to steal your uncles, your auntie, moms, whoever had one, because you had to have it going to school.
But the saga doesn't stop there. Oh no, this isn't just one isolated incident. Because as investigators dug deeper into Big U's tangled web of influence, they started finding connections, disturbing, undeniable connections, to other high-profile tragedies. Take the case of Nipsey Hussle, a name forever etched into the soul of Los Angeles. Nipsey wasn't just a rapper, he was a movement, a beacon of hope in a city that desperately needed one. And yet, even his meteoric rise couldn't shield him from the shadows that seemed to follow Big U wherever he went. What adds even more attention to the Nipsey narrative is the timeline of their fallout. It wasn't just a quiet drifting apart. It was a public, almost theatrical unraveling of what once seemed like an unshakable bond. Big U had been instrumental in Nipsey's early career, offering guidance and connections that helped the young rapper navigate the treacherous waters of the industry. But as Nipsey's star began to shine brighter, cracks started forming in their relationship. Insiders claimed that Nipsey didn't just want independence, he demanded it. He reportedly refused to pay certain fees that had been standard in his earlier years, and that refusal didn't sit well with Big U. The tension reached a boiling point when Nipsey allegedly released a track that not so subtly called out Big U's tactics, a move that some say was both bold and reckless. In their world, calling someone out like that wasn't just a lyrical flex, it was a declaration of war.
And when you look back on that time, right, like now, you know, you and I have talked, and we talk about what was going on with, you know, housing, jobs, you know, what was creating the environment around that, why the hustling, why the drug dealing, why the sets were so important, why so many people were buying drugs, why there was violence, you know, why all of this stuff was happening when you...
And let's not forget the eerie timing of certain events that followed their falling out. Just months after the rumored diss track, Nipsey faced a series of incidents that some believe weren't coincidental. Equipment stolen from his store, threats whispered in back rooms. It all pointed to someone sending a message. Big U, of course, denied any involvement, chalking it up to the chaos of the streets. But for those who knew Nipsey, the pattern was hard to ignore. It wasn't just about business. It was about power, control, and the price of breaking free. And even now, years later, the scars of that fractured relationship linger, with many still questioning just how much more there is to the story that's yet to be told. The whispers had been there long before Nipsey's untimely end. Stories of tension, of power struggles, of a relationship that soured as Nipsey's star rose and his need for protection diminished. It's said that Nipsey's decision to distance himself from Big U wasn't just about business, it was personal. He didn't want to play by the rules Big U had laid down. Didn't want to be another pawn in a game he didn't agree with. And in the circles they both moved in, defiance like that didn't come without consequences. People started asking questions, connecting dots, and wondering aloud if Nipsey's refusal to bow to Big U's demands might have made him a target. It's a theory that's never been proven, but the fact that it lingers, that it refuses to go away, speaks volumes.
Yeah, definitely, it's poverty. I was just having this conversation with my homeboy the other day, and and I'm finna be on the opposite side of this so-called world. If would have never hit California, and it wouldn't hit the East Coast, we would have still been in a bad situation. Did not create a bad situation for inner city youth. It was the condition of America.
And then there's PNB Rock. The story of his last moments is still raw, still too fresh for many to process. But even in the midst of heartbreak, the rumor started almost immediately. Big U's name found its way into the conversation, not because there was any concrete evidence tying him to what happened, but because of his reputation. This is a man who built an empire on fear and control, who made it clear that in his world, you play by his rules or you pay the price. And when P. Rock's life was cut short in Los Angeles, a city Big U has long claimed as his territory, people couldn't help but wonder, was this another case of someone who didn't check in? Another cautionary tale in a long line of them? The thing about Big U is that his influence isn't confined to the streets. It stretches into the boardrooms, the studios, even into City Hall. That's what makes this story so extraordinary and so terrifying. Because while the average person might see him as just another name in the headlines, those who've crossed paths with him know better. They know that Big U isn't just a man, he's an institution, a force of nature, someone who's managed to blur the lines between criminal enterprise and legitimate business so effectively that even seasoned investigators struggle to keep up.
We was excuse lack for a better term, we was in a situation regardless. Our living conditions were atrocious. Before a lot of people's living conditions improved more. But if you go back and you look at the era, if you look at 79, 80, 81, 82, 83, we didn't own houses. The streets were terrible. These houses were terrible.
And let's not forget the financial schemes, because while the allegations of violence and intimidation grabbed the most attention, it's the money trail that might ultimately bring him down. From his nonprofit Developing Options to the alleged misuse of pandemic relief loans, Big U's financial dealings read like a how-to guide for corruption. Investigators say he funneled millions through his charity, money that was supposed to help at-risk youth but instead lined his own pockets. And the donors? Celebrities, athletes, even city officials. People who thought they were contributing to a good cause but were in reality funding a criminal empire. It's the kind of betrayal that cuts deep, not just because of the money loss but because of the trust shattered. And yet, for all the evidence piling up against him, Big U remains defiant. In his few public statements, he's painted himself as the victim, a man targeted by enemies who want to see him fail. He's blamed everyone, from Wack 100 to the media, insisting that the narrative being spun around him is nothing more than a smear campaign. But even his most loyal supporters are starting to waver, because the facts are becoming impossible to ignore. The phone records, the surveillance footage, the testimonies, it's all there, out in the open, waiting to be pieced together into a story that could finally bring Big U's empire crashing down.
This is my last video before I turn myself in. I'm with my family. Talk to my sons, I talk to everybody, man. I'm just saying, going to deal with this fight, see what it is. I just want y'all to know.
The question now isn't whether Big U will face consequences, it's how far those consequences will reach. Will they take down just him, or will they expose the entire network of power and influence he's spent decades building? And what about the people who've stood by him, the collaborators and allies who've benefited from his rise? Are they complicit, or are they just pawns in a game they didn't fully understand? These are the questions everyone's asking, and the answers might be closer than we think. But what do you think? Is Big U the mastermind of a criminal operation so vast it defies comprehension? Or is he just another scapegoat in a system that loves to tear down its own? And what about Wack 100? Hero, villain, or something in between? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and as always, stay tuned for more. Because trust us, this story is far from over.